it's really been a beautiful practice again and again and again to surrender. I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you 5.5 years after leaving Harley had I not surrendered to the fact that I was completely disconnected with my own soul and my own truth. Saying, okay, I'm going to take some time. I'm going to nurture that connection. I'm going to really understand what is my truth? What is my definition of success? What is my dream? Because I realized I was living my dad's dream, which, as you know, is part of what I say in the book. Really surrender to all of those things. And if I had not done that, I don't believe our paths would have ever crossed. Right. And what a shame that would be.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation.
Hey everybody, it's Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining me at the Warriors at Work show. It's time for you to meet the amazing Shelley Paxton, author, speaker, rebel leader, former chief marketing officer of Harley-Davidson. Shelley found herself at the top of what she described as a proverbial mountain, feeling success empty instead of successful. She had an awakening that led her on a profound journey, which has now become her mission, her business, and her best-selling book, which is Soulbbatical, a corporate rebel's guide to finding your best life. She is leading what she calls a revolution to rewrite the script of success and liberate, ready for this, 1 billion souls. I am so excited to bring to you this conversation, and I feel so blessed that I am on a journey with Shelley, and I got to share time and space to talk about things like fear, surrender, release, possibility thinking. This is an honest, raw, direct, unfiltered conversation with someone who is going to redefine success. I hope all of you feel inspired, excited, and a little bit more fierce after you've heard this conversation. Enjoy. All right, here we are. I get to talk to the Chief Soul Officer, Shelley Paxton. So thank you so much for joining me in this conversation today.
Oh my God, thank you for having me, Jeannie. And I'm going to just show you. I wore my Chief Soul Officer t-shirt just for you.
Of course you did.
Mm-hmm.
Shelley,
yep.
So we are going to talk about this gorgeous book, this gorgeous, beautiful, moving, magnificent creation of yours. And I looked at this conversation. It's not just an interview of an author. You're so much more. You really embody so many of the attributes that I talk about on the Warriors at Work show. You revealed yourself in such an honest, beautiful, raw way for the sake of helping other people. Like, you really, really embody this Chief Soul Officer idea. And while we are going to talk about your book, Soulbbatical, a corporate rebel's guide to finding your best self, we're also going to step into Shelley's magnificent life, all of the dimensions, all the messiness, because there is so much wisdom here for all of the warriors that follow me, that watch this show and listen to these conversations. We're all trying to find our best life. And you do such a magnificent job of sharing so much with us that this was one of those books where I wrote down so many friggin' things you said and highlighted things that have stuck around. There's so much stickiness to this. I'm sure there's extraordinary things coming your way as a result. And so here's where I wanted to start. I'm going to start at the end of the book.
I love it. You surprise me every time, Jeannie. Keep going.
That's something that jumped out at me that I so often see in my coaching leaders, and it really defines what Soulbbatical is all about. And I just want to read it. And for anybody that has this book, it's page 238. And the title is Surrender Leads to Success, Not Defeat. We're warriors, right? We set big, hairy, audacious goals that celebrate our immense productivity, often at the expense of our health and sanity. Hell yes. But in the end, our soul always knows what it wants, and it works on its own timeline. Soulbbatical is about allowing our souls to guide us without our personalities, our identities, our preconceived notions getting in the way. It's accepting that our souls are shepherding us toward the experiences we need to have and surrendering to the flow instead of hammering our way through. This book is an epic lesson in surrender. Just like, even when I read it to you out loud, and I read it so many times, tell me what surrender means to you. What was going on there when you wrote that?
Well, I want to thank you for reading that out loud right now because I feel like I'm in the constant lesson of surrender.
Mm.
So even in this moment, I feel like I'm still being called to truly let go. And so I feel like what you just read was the early days of me starting to understand, not completely understanding, but starting to understand this beautiful notion that I'm really not as in control of my life
Mm.
as I always thought I was. I think so many of us, especially us overachievers, and I'm guessing all of us warriors have this same thing in common. Like, a lot of times we're like white knuckling that wheel of life. Like we're like, I'm gonna steer this thing exactly in the right direction. I know I was doing that for so long, and I still catch myself in moments of doing that. And so it really, like, even hearing you read that in this moment feels like a really big exhale. So I
Mm.
love that I heard you do that as you were reading it. I felt myself doing that. I invite everybody listening to this to do that because we don't have that control, right? We really don't. And the sooner we realize that and we trust, I think surrender is always paired with something else. For me, I always say it's trust and surrender. I'm
Mhm.
trusting that what is coming to me is coming to me. I'm trusting that if I'm truly connected to myself and I'm listening deeply and I'm following those little breadcrumbs and all the synchronicity that's happening, it's all coming. And my job is to surrender to it. And I hear myself saying those words to you, and I'm like, who are you? Right? Because for so many decades, none of that made sense to me. And that's that, as that's a big part of the story I tell in the book. It's like, I got this. I'm going to figure out this career. I'm going to do this thing. I've got it. I'm going to make all the moves. And it's really been a beautiful practice again and again and again to surrender. I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you 5.5 years after leaving Harley had I not surrendered to the fact that I was completely disconnected with my own soul and my own truth.
Mm.
And first, then, saying, okay, I'm going to take some time. I'm going to nurture that connection. I'm going to really understand what is my truth? What is my definition of success? What is my dream? Because I realized I was living my dad's dream, which, as you know, is part of what I say in the book, and really surrender to all of those things. And if I had not done that I don't believe our paths would have ever
Right.
crossed. And what a shame that would be.
Yeah. Well, just the word surrender is not something a highly ambitious, A type driving senior executive, chief marketing officer, world traveler. That is not a word that is
Yeah.
often used. If anything, it's almost a sign of defeat. I had to
Oh,
surrender to the decision. I had to surrender to, I'm done fighting or battling that particular thing. Why do you think we're so afraid of that word surrender?
I think part of it, you just so beautifully summarized it. And I think part of it is because we're conditioned to believe that's weakness.
Yeah. Mm,
Right? So, I mean, speaking for myself, but having done this work for as many years as I've done this work now, I have heard so many women in particular, but so many beautiful souls say these same things like to say I'm going to surrender, to say I'm going to just lean into something, to say I'm going to trust the flow of something, to say I'm going to ask for help, whether it be from my community or the universe, feels very passive
yeah.
and almost like I'm giving up to those of us who were conditioned that, to really lean into our masculine, like I'm going to push through, I'm going to get it done, I'm going to make it happen, I'm going to force it, which is the exact opposite of what we're talking about and the exact opposite of what I personally was taught that success is.
Mhm.
And so much of my story, and I know yours as well, and I'm sure so many of the warriors we're talking to, success is exactly the opposite
Yeah.
of so much of what we were taught, so much of what we believed, so much of how we were conditioned. And surrender is a piece of true success and what I call being successful versus success empty.
Mhm.
Because you and I both know this, like true success comes from the inside out. It's a feeling. It's about what fills me up and what makes me feel truly fulfilled in this lifetime. And surrender, trust and surrender, both are a
Mhm.
big piece of that. So
Yeah.
this is all new to me, sister, as you know.
I'm thinking like there's many times when I was reading it, I was like, "Oh, wow, I wonder where in my schedule, where would I learn to surrender? Where would I learn to trust? Where?" And then I can imagine some conversations with executives that I work with saying the same thing. Well, I could try to surrender between 1 and 3.
Right, right.
Um,
Yes.
and then so much of the work that I do is I'm helping people undo bad feedback, bad behaviors, conditioning that they've learned. I'm
Yeah.
curious, how do you help people to embrace this idea of surrender?
Oh, this is an ongoing process because I'm helping myself still embrace this idea of surrender. And I think it's probably a lifetime project for
Mm,
me. I will tell you first how I've been working through it because you and I think in the short time that we've known each other, I feel like we're kindred spirits, we're
mm,
soul sisters. And I think this will resonate with you, but for me, the only thing that's helped me really understand this is practicing it. And when I practice it, and then I see things happen as a result that I know could not possibly have happened had I like pushed through.
yeah.
So, maybe a good example is and these are I'm giving you a personal example because I believe in showing up vulnerably and also just being in the mess of life because we're humans, we're messy, and that's gorgeous, and I want more of us to share what it's like to be in the mess, and to be in it together. So, a great example of this was when I was writing the book, and I remember I would have days. So I had certain days of the week that were allocated. So it was funny that you said, like, I think I'll kind of, surrender from 1 to 3 p.m. Well, here's what I did when I was writing the book. I would say, I'm now forgetting which days, but I think it was Mondays, Fridays, Saturdays, and sometimes Sundays were full on writing days when I was like in the throes of writing my book. And I will tell you that there were some of those days, let's just like pick a random Monday where I would get up. I had rituals and things that I would do to just sort of prime my brain and my body to say, today's a writing day. And even doing those things, I would sit in front of my computer and I'd be like, like dead
Well
air.
intentioned, but you're like, crap.
Yeah, I'm like,
happening.
I got no words. And this chick is rarely speechless, right? So I'm like, I got no words, nothing's coming
Yeah.
out. Like, you try to prime the pump, you try, and nothing's coming. And instead of saying, okay, like, I'm going to accept that this is not the moment because maybe my soul's like, yeah, no, it doesn't matter if it's a Monday. We're not there. Like, go out and play. Go, be with people you love. Go, just let things continue to percolate.
Mm,
I would try to force, because this is what I did for so many
yeah.
years in the corporate world. I would try to force myself. I'd be like, no, it's a writing day.
Mm,
And for fuck's sake, you're going to write.
yeah.
And I would just get in like this zone and I would just like try to force stuff out. And then I'd feel angry by the end of the day and I'd feel super resentful. I'm like, I wasted a writing day. Oh, I wasted a writing day. How could I possibly do that? I don't have very many writing days. So, you get it, right? This idea. And I remember going to one of my coaches at the time and I was explaining to him, like, I'm losing my mind because some days I don't have very many writing days and I have this looming deadline. And, what am I going to do? And he's like, Shelley, like, follow your soul. Like, if your soul will let you know when it's ready to, when all that percolation is ready to come out, you'll know. That's what flow is.
Mm,
So if you're not feeling it, don't force it. Like, go. At the time I was doing some writing in LA. It's like, go for a walk on the beach, go for lunch with your friends, go do whatever you need to do, read a good book, do whatever you need to do, and then come back to it the next day.
mhm.
And be okay with that. And so that was one of my first real exposures to this idea of trust and surrender. That was so beautiful because when I finally followed that advice, and it took me a little bit of time, as you can imagine, because I'm stubborn and
Yeah.
my conditioning is so different than that advice. When I finally did and I relaxed into that idea, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go for a walk. Okay, I'm gonna go do the thing.
You know what you're
And I
reminding me
do,
of? It's like,
yeah.
it's not just our thinking mind, and what happens is when we put our and again, because of our conditioning, we think, well, we have to rely upon our thinking mind to get us through circumstances, and when we stop and say, "That has a place, but there's so much more available to you," and the greatest teacher that has taught me how to think beyond and trust more parts of the brain and trust more of your experiences is one of my daughters. Is when she's got a lot of homework, she's in high school, she stops and starts to read. Literally, she'll just pick out a
Mm,
fiction book, she starts to read, or she fools around on TikTok, or she puts music on, or she starts cooking.
yeah.
And I remember I asked her, I said, "Don't you have like a ton of homework and you have AP exams?" She's like, "Yeah, yeah. This is how I rest my brain. I do something other than what's in front of me because I'm getting frustrated."
Beautiful.
And I was like, "That's brilliant." And
Yes.
so now I call it Sloan time because her name's Sloan. I'm like, "I'm gonna have a little Sloan time." And I'll go on TikTok, which is the most addicting thing ever, or I'll pull out a magazine or a book, or I'll just go sit outside, go change my environment. And it's amazing, even if it's like 5, 10 minutes, anything to interrupt that thinking mind, I'm like, oh my God, I've been sitting here staring at this thing for like 2 hours. I couldn't figure out how to get through it. Now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that's what it is.
I love that you said that because half the time when I would go, yeah, you know what? You're right. I'm just going to walk on the beach, which would feel so frivolous
Yeah.
to me before. I go walk on the beach and I would say 90% of the time, halfway through that walk, I'd get a thought and I'd pick up my phone and I'd start taking notes in the notes app, or I'd voice record some like download that I was getting. And I'm like, oh, I get this. Me sitting and beating myself up in front of a blank, blank piece of
Yeah.
paper, like blank page on my computer will get me nowhere. Me going, I'm letting go. And I'm going to just go
Mm,
and be in the world, and especially in nature. I love that you gave that example, but sometimes it is just zoning out as well. And then the thoughts start to come. I will very often, there's a trail that I'm looking at outside my window. It's an urban trail in here in Chicago that runs right by my house. And when I'm having those super frustrating moments and I'm like, let go, Shelley, let go, it is time to surrender, I will often pick up my phone, my earbuds, and I will start walking the trail. And sometimes I'll put on a random podcast. Sometimes I'll listen to nothing and just let my own thoughts kind of spin until I can make some sense. And almost every time at some point in that walk, I end up the same thing,
yeah.
like voice recording or writing in notes. So there's magic to this. So those are micro examples, but I've also like the macro example is this is kind of the way life is meant to be lived.
Yeah, right?
Right?
It's just opening up different channels, different pathways. It's stop looking at it
Amen.
always like linear. There's one pathway to doing something. And that's also how you get messages from the soul. Is it isn't necessarily a linear thing. And one of the things that you
No.
talked about, which I love, because I want to get into the fear part, because fear plays a part in not surrendering, right?
Mhm.
And one of the things that you said, I just, oh, is this another one where I was like, oh, damn, this is so good. You said in your book, fear never completely releases you from its clutches. No matter how seasoned you get, learn to dance with it. Give us an example of how you dance with fear.
So, as a little bit of context, and you know this from reading the book, I was an improv comedy student. So, in my early 20s, I joined Second City here in Chicago, very famous improv training center. Was not famous enough to get into SNL and do all the fabulous things that Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and some of my other idols have done. And the gift was bigger than I could have ever imagined,
Mm,
because I believe that improv teaches you the fundamentals of life. And this ties directly to fear. I mean, just the willingness and again, surrender of stepping onto a stage, into a circle, into the unknown. The
mhm.
audience is suggesting to you characters, locations, things that you didn't know before that moment in time. You have no idea what your partners in crime on stage are going to be doing. You have no idea what your move is. You have to be fully present in the moment and willing to be in that yes and mindset.
Mm.
And that taught me so much about life. So this was the early 20s. So I was in Second City, and then a group of us sort of split off and we created a little improv troupe called the Oxymorons. Who went nowhere. And so there's no success story there to tell. But it was honestly one of the greatest experiences of my life, because I got to practice this every weekend on a little tiny stage. I got to practice being with fear. I got to practice this idea that, you know what, on the other side of fear is everything you
Mm,
want.
mm.
And this idea of leaning in. So I think I'm giving everyone this context because I think it's super important. Not that everyone should go do improv, but I am saying if you ever have a chance to take an improv class or course in the city that you live in, please do it. Like, just do it. I mean, this to me is leaning into fear. My friend Judy Holler talks about this all the time. And if you don't follow Judy Holler,
Yep.
please do. She's incredible. And she's built her whole business, House of on the principles of improv. And you know what? It's like we can acknowledge that there's fear. Of course, there's fear. We're human. We're human. There's always going to be fear. And the idea is like, yeah, and I can go, yeah, but you know what? You don't get the wheel. I get the wheel. You get in the back seat. You get in the back seat. I'm taking the wheel. Fear is always going to be along for the ride because that's the way our lizard brain works. That's the way we've been designed as humans. It does not mean that it needs to govern everything that we do. And I think having that awareness of like, we know when there's fear of like, oh my God, there's somebody behind me in a dark alley. That's a fear you should act on, right? Like pay attention. And we know when there's a fear because we're at a growth edge. We're at that place that's about to push us into a breakthrough, cross the threshold moment in our lives that could potentially change our lives and the trajectory of where we're going. And we know that. So how do we say, yeah, you know what? Thank you. Right. Like Judy and others, being in my improv troupe have taught me to say thank you to that little voice in my head. Like, I know it's trying to keep me safe. I get it.
Yeah.
And I want to play bigger. I want to experience what's on the other side because I now know what's on the other side has gotten me where I am today. So I'm willing to dance with it. I'm willing to step into it and say, yeah, okay, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have some of those feels, and that's all right. It's reminding me that I'm human. And I butcher this all the time, but I think it's Bruce Springsteen who said, like, somebody said, well, are you nervous every time that you get on stage? I mean, you've been on stage zillions of times performing for, God knows how many people, like, you're the boss. And he was like, yeah, but you know what? Like nervousness and excitement feel the same in your body. And I've always thought that was such a beautiful sentiment. Like nervousness and excitement feel the same in your body, and our body tells us the truth. So why not lean into the excitement of the unknown, the excitement of something new that's going to take us into that new chapter, next season, new experience, whatever it is of our lives. That to me is so cool.
You remind me, one of my favorite books is The Big Leap by Gay.
Oh, love it. Love
He
it.
talks
Love it.
about that as an upper limit problem. When you're stepping into your genius, so you're playing with the edges of your own capacity in the world, you're just having an upper limit problem. And that's what you're talking about. You use some great expressions, just even on the other side of fear is everything you want. You said some other really cool expressions, and I just want to play with this. Sherpa of my soul, totally dig that.
Yeah.
See myself like going up the mountain.
Yeah.
Shackles of should. Holy crap. I mean, that is like the epitome of a business person. What's an expression you found yourself referring to a lot as you were exploring, or as you're exploring currently your own soul's path? Is there like a mantra? Is there like, or there are various ones that often will inform you?
Yeah. So I love that you said shackles of should, because I still think that is one of those things that will be with me forever. It's sort of like the forever lesson around surrendering. I think there's the forever lesson around catching ourselves in the shoulds, like catching ourselves as we are shoulding on ourselves. So the shackles of should, I think, is super powerful because we are often creating the prison that we're in. We are so very often creating the confines of the thing that feels so constricting and so limiting, and the thing that's keeping us playing so small. So I'm still always playing with catching myself in the shoulds, because I think even as we make the conscious decision to play bigger and bigger and to push our growth edges and get uncomfortable and, get past that upper limit,
Yeah.
as Gay Hendricks says, we're always going to have the next thing in the next season as we're playing bigger and bigger and bigger, because why would we want to stop growing on this beautiful journey called life? So that's one of those things for me, is I am always paying attention to the language that I'm using.
Mm.
And I'm human, so I catch myself in the shoulds. And when I do, I get really curious. It's like, wait a second. Ooh, wait, okay, why did I say I should? What's going on there? And so I invite everyone to get curious, investigate, like, what's behind the should. I mean, is it guilt? Is it obligation? Is
Mm.
it people pleasing? Is it all of those things? And then how do we unwind that to be like, okay, wait, what do I want to do? What do I get to do? What do I love to do? To me, I still have fun exploring all of that, because I still find myself I do this around my business all the time. Well, I should have an online course,
Yeah.
because that's what successful authors do. This is a real live narrative for me all the time. Oh, this is what, like, the Gabby Bernsteins of the world do. On the back of every book that she publishes, she has a really successful online course. And so I should do the same thing. I mean, I do this to myself all the time. So that's one. The other, so a mantra you asked about, man, what are the things that's always on my bathroom mirror and my refrigerator is something that's also in the book. And it is, authenticity is the truest form of rebellion.
Mm.
And that ties to those shoulds, right? Because the shoulds are what other people and other voices, whether it's my parents' voices, quote unquote successful people in the business space, whatever, peers, friends, it's what other people are doing. And I remind myself at every turn that the reason I got here, the reason that Soulbbatical was created in the first place, that it became a movement, that it became a book, that I'm now writing book number 2 called Successful, around this idea of, like, what does it really mean to live success on your own terms? That's authenticity. That's me really leaning into what lights me up, what drives me, what I know to be true. And why I say it's authenticity is the truest form of rebellion is because society doesn't necessarily want us to lean into
Yeah,
that stuff, right?
sure.
We're conditioned exactly the opposite. It's like, no, wait a second. We don't want too many of you doing that thing that
Yeah.
feels really good to you
Like,
and that
pump the
looks so
brakes.
much different. Totally, right? Yeah.
I always often think of fear is not a good enough reason not to do something. And when you talked
Yes.
about, fear, I always go back to this visual that I learned. A therapist friend of mine said is I think it's often your inner critic that will show up and go, oh, you're going to sound so stupid. Don't do that. No. You sound stupid. You're doing too many things. You're not doing enough. And the visual she gave me, she said, that's often your younger self. You could probably even give her an age. Mine's usually around 10. And she's like, imagine yourself driving a car and you don't want to dismiss them to say what you're saying is not of value because they're there to help you because they
Yeah.
think you're going to hurt yourself. You acknowledge their contribution, but you remind them that I'm in charge. I'm the adult. I give mine a juice box. Go sit in
Yeah,
the back
I
seat.
love it. It's like I got the wheel. I
Yeah.
love how beautifully aligned those two concepts are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so true. And it's like, yeah, we're okay. We're going to be okay. But
I'm
I
okay.
think it's a really beautiful idea and action to say, thank you. Like, thank you for looking after me, to your 10-year-old self, right? To yourself who wants you to be safe, and yourself that doesn't want you to get bullied or feel bad. So that's a really beautiful practice.
Mm. I want to switch gears a little bit. I'd love to talk about some labels and roles. Not only do you talk about this in your book, but it really resonated with me just when I zoomed out and I looked at your whole career trajectory and all of the hats you've worn, all the organizations you've been a part of, all of these different things that you've led in your life. And I was so curious as I was learning more about you is how old identities like chief marketing officer of Harley-Davidson show up in your new life
Mm.
as chief soul officer. Like, do they bump heads sometimes?
Oh, yes, is the short answer. I think, some of the context and the backstory on that for those who haven't read the book is that was the hardest work I had to do on this journey. Hands down, the most turbulent time. I was struggling for the right word. I'm like, the most turbulent time, that the time I felt where I was just like in the spin cycle in the washing machine and I couldn't get out and I didn't know which way was up, was when I left Harley and I suddenly went, who the fuck am I?
Mm.
Like, who am I? Because I realized for the first time ever that for so long, basically my entire adult life, since I started, my corporate career at age 21, the only thing I ever knew, the only thing maybe I ever believed, was that my value, my worth, was tied to this corporate career and tied to the brands that I supported, because I was fortunate enough to be serving some of the most incredible global iconic brands. Visa and AOL and McDonald's and Intel, and later in my career, Harley-Davidson, where I kind of was like, whoa, like that's where I obviously had the big epiphany. And it's incredible to me how easy it is for that to happen. So I leave because I want to reconnect with my soul. And then I find myself in this place going, oh my God, but wait, what is there? Like, if
Mm.
I'm not in this job working for this, global brand that's so sexy, people tattoo it on their bodies. And I've got
So true. That's so true.
right,
I never even thought of
right.
that.
And I've got a C-suite job, and I've got, a paycheck with lots of zeros, and I'm getting all these accolades. I mean, you can keep going and going and going, right? Because these are what we are conditioned to. Go back to the
Mm.
earlier conversation. We're conditioned that these are the metrics of success. These are the terms of success because society has decided that's what they are. And
Right.
I was way wrapped up in all of that. So here I am, I step away for all the right reasons to say, I've really got to figure out, like, I realized I was living my dad's dream.
Mm.
And let's be honest, for 26 years, that served me incredibly well. I have no regrets. I had the career of a lifetime. And at the same time, I found myself at the top of the proverbial mountain feeling kind of empty
Mm.
and realizing that that wasn't my dream. And yet, when I walked away, I don't think I was prepared for exactly what I was going to face. So, this question of identity was one that just like, I'm going to say it smacked me, but it did more than that. It knocked me on my knees. It
Mm.
was that kind of pain where you can't get up off the floor.
Mm.
And I thought, I have made the biggest mistake of my life because I don't know who I am. I've only ever been, this steward of these incredible brands. And then I remembered that when I left Harley, I forced myself to ask a question. I said, what if the Shelley Paxton brand was the most powerful brand I could ever represent? Whew, right?
What
And
did you write when you asked yourself that question? When you were like, I have no idea. Like what?
well, so this leads to the identity. This leads to the identity breakdown. Like, what's the right word? Breakdown. So when I was in New Zealand, you might remember this from the book, I had an epic breakdown around this idea because I'm like, okay, I'm willing to embrace the idea, the possibility that the Shelley Paxton brand is the most powerful brand I could ever represent. But what the hell does that mean?
Mm.
I don't
Mm.
even know. As a lifelong marketer, this is a terrifying thing to admit. I was like, I don't really know who I am or what I stand for.
Wow. Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So there I am in the midst of, if you remember the scene, like a monsoon that hit. So I'm like, I'm just gonna go to New Zealand, and I stayed. I ended up staying, and I found this cute little seaside cottage, and I'm like, I'm gonna start writing. And I truly thought in that moment that that was gonna be the beginning of my book.
Mm.
Didn't really know what book I was
Mm.
writing, but I was like, I'm just gonna start priming the pump and see what happens. And then I get into this cottage, and within a day, this massive, like, monsoon torrential thing, I'm like living across from, a bay, the bay of like the Tasman Sea. And I'm like, oh my God, the ocean is going to come into my little living room. I'm in this tiny cottage by myself. And I was like, wow, this is the universe like forcing me to get really serious. Like, there is no one but me. There is no wine in this house. There's limited food. I just need to get really serious about soul searching
Mm.
and really, really get clear on who I am. And so I did the I am exercise that's in the book, and I started writing. I'm like, okay, strip away like the title, strip away the accolades, strip away, the mistakes I've made, strip away, the size of my body, strip away all the ways I've ever measured myself and determined my value, and get clear on like, what am I at my core, at my essence? And I wrote what I now call my I am manifesto, which is sort of like my personal manifesto about, what I am when you strip all that stuff away. And I'm not lying, I was bawling for 3 days straight
Mm.
because it was the hardest work I've ever done. And that's what's really at the core of what you asked about. I mean, it's like getting clear on who are we? Like, when we strip away all that conditioning and all those external validations and all those things that we were taught were representative of our value. And that's all bullshit.
Mm.
The hardest part is going inside and really, really getting clear on like who we are. And that was the beginning of me saying, like, things that are so natural to me right now. Like, I'm bold, I'm badass, I'm a trailblazer, I'm a lighthouse, I'm beautiful. Like, Jeannie, I'd never said that before. Like, I've never said I'm beautiful. I would have never, ever, like, I just wasn't even raised in a household where my parents said, oh, you and your sister, you're pretty, you're smart, you're funny, you're witty, you can put anything you put your mind to. But I didn't believe it. So for me, it was
When you said
checking
you
in.
loved yourself too in the
Yeah.
book, that was a pivotal moment, and again, something that really resonated because
Yeah.
very often we can strip away all those labels and look at ourselves and say, "Okay, I know who I am."
And then what often happens is the critical person will say, well, that's not enough. You're not doing this right. You're not doing that right.
Yeah.
And you stripped away all those things and said to yourself for the first time that you loved yourself.
I love
Like,
myself.
even just that was so powerful
Yeah.
and so beautiful and something that we just don't do.
Yeah, and that is another thing I love that you highlighted, because those two things like were, oh, I had to do them in tandem. I wanted to understand, like, who am I at my core, and I want to appreciate and just celebrate every single one of those beautiful attributes of me that no one else can give me. They're innate to me. And then I want to love on myself. And I thought, oh, I have never ever said that to myself. You know, how many times, and I'm going through this right now. I just went through a big breakup, and I'm like, you know what, Shelley? It's your job to love you.
Yeah.
To love you. Like, that's my job. My job. I just read, a friend of mine sent me the most beautiful thing the other day. And it was like, you want to find the love of your life? So, first of all, like, write down all the ways you want to feel when you find that love. Write down all the attributes of that person who's going to give you all of that love, and then go be those things. And it was like, oh my God, exactly. Right?
Oh, I just like felt that.
And how many times do I need this reminder? Like, this doesn't come. And by the way, I'm not saying, like, I absolutely, you know, I'm a divorced woman who, you know, has been in and out of the dating world, and I want to find a long-term life partner. And yet I'm getting more and more clear on the things that I just will not. Like, this was a person, he was not interested in coming into the soul world. He was not interested in really diving in to do the inner work to make, you know, for his life and or our life together. And I'm like, well, that's a no. That's a no. So I'm also really proud of myself, because I'm staying true to me. And I preach a life of authenticity and courage. And it is hard to leave a relationship that feels fun and the chemistry is really good, right?
Yeah.
But if it's not going to go any deeper, so I think often back to those days where I first said to myself, I love you, and I'm practicing that. And I love that you and I are having this conversation today, because you know this from our exchange. But I just spent 3+ hours doing a photo shoot, and it's for a new website, and just I'm stepping into the Shelley Paxton brand. This is so relevant for what we're talking about right now. 5.5 years later, I'm finally bold, brave, and badass enough to step into the Shelley Paxton brand. Even the Soulbbatical brand, which is so beautiful, was only one step of the journey. And I'm like, no, the idea is for me to step into who I am, and all these other pieces fall under who I am. And so I'm going to be launching that website, and we were doing a photo shoot today. And I have been so critical of myself. I mean, one, I'm on the heels of a breakup, you know, about a week and a half ago. And two, I just sometimes find it hard to really embrace, like, all of those, you know, beautiful things that are me. And so I went into this and I was like, my clothes don't fit the way I want them to fit. And, you know, I had all the grumpy stories. And then I just was like, snap out of it, girl. Remember your I am manifesto. Ground yourself in that and show up as that person at your photo shoot, and show up at that as that person every single day, because we're so critical of ourselves. And I'm like, I am not my weight. I am not my body size. I am not, who cares? Show up as the beautiful light you are in the world. And I'm coming into, you know, I came into today kind of resetting around that idea. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And it's fucking hard. Let's be honest. It's hard.
Flawed, messy, wild, loving, crazy person. That's often how I would
Mhm.
characterize myself. And I'm like, so
Totally.
what? So I am. Well, let's talk about some of these incredible successes that you're having, going back to the book and the becoming of Shelley Paxton. Tell us a little bit about like what's coming to you after you've put this beautiful thing out into the world.
Whew, what is coming to me? Well, this has been a giant lesson in trust and surrender, just to pull that thread through a little bit further. So, you know what? It's interesting. I mean, from reading the book that I believe in living my life very open and vulnerably, because I just think the deeper we go, the more we have that human connection, and the more we share our story, the more we can bond with and inspire each other. And so I don't hold anything back, like sharing anything about this journey. This journey's been a wild roller coaster. A wild roller coaster. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, I say every day, or to anybody who asks, like, if you told me you'd pay me millions of dollars to go back to a CMO job or anything like that, I would say hell no.
Mm.
I mean, for all the struggles, I'm not making zillions of dollars doing what I'm doing, but I have never felt more on purpose in my entire life. I've never felt more on fire. I've never felt more like I'm having more of an impact, which is kind of my success
Mm.
currency in this season of my life. My success currency is ripples of impact. And I believe money follows impact, and it will continue to build. So I think the story behind the question that you asked is, it's funny. I inadvertently built a coaching business. And not that that's a bad thing. It's just that that wasn't really the vision I had, but I kind of was like, oh, this is interesting. And, I did my coach training and I had some really amazing clients and I kept doing it. And in the middle of that, I got a book deal, and then it gave me the freedom to write a book and still keep coaching some people. And I kind of like had this wake up last week, or not, sorry, not last week, last year. And I was like, this isn't really what I set out to do, because I have established this mission of liberating 1 billion souls that I know I can't, I'm not going to do on my own. But really, scale is a really important part of what I'm going to do in the world, right? I want to impact a lot of people. I want to help millions and 1 billion souls rewrite their script of success on their own terms. I want more of us to feel successful. So how can I do that if I'm running a one-on-one coaching practice, right?
Mm.
So I've gotten really clear that I want to do more speaking. So I'm really ramping up my speaking. I've gotten clear that I want to write more books, which is why I'm writing book number 2, as I mentioned. And I already have book number 3 in mind, which I'm super excited about. I am doing more teaching and workshops. I'm doing my podcasting. So all of this stuff has very organically happened. And as it comes up, I'm listening. And it's funny that as that's been happening, I've also gotten some interesting phone calls. So Hollywood has been looking into my book. So my first book, Soulbbatical, that you mentioned. There are some very well-known production firms production houses, production firms, I don't know what you call them, who are looking into optioning my book and possibly creating a movie or series out of it. Like, there's just cool stuff that I am practicing trust and surrender around.
Yeah.
Right?
I just can't wait to see what happens next. Like, you are just such a force in the world, and
Thank
I
you.
will do everything I can to help you liberate 1 billion souls.
Oh, sister, and I likewise will support you. I'm so honored that we're like on this journey together and that we're supporting each other, and whoo!
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeannie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.